Hey guys, it's Jeremy with Career Lab, the channel where I interview interesting people about their career path and ask them for their career and life advice. And today I have a very special guest. It's James Freeman, the founder of Blue Bottle Coffee. If you're not familiar with Blue Bottle, it's a coffee company that started here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Today it's worth $700 million and it has shops all across the US and even in Japan. I kind of messed up the audio on this interview, so I really apologize about that. I made my best to touch it up, but you'll still see it's a little bothersome. So there's 3 points that we talk about that are interesting in this interview. One, James talks about how he started Blue Bottle right after being fired from his position at the time. We talk about minimalism and several philosophy points, because James was a philosophy major as an undergrad, and we talk about how that affected Blue Bottle today. And last, we talk about mastery and how the focus for the craft is kind of how James approaches work and how anyone can find purpose in their work, whatever that work is. I hope you enjoyed the interview. I'm going to add some footnotes in the description, actually bookmarks, where you can go ahead and skip to the content that's most interesting to you. If you enjoy it, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you get notified of future videos, and let me know what you think of the video in the comments. Alright, let's get started. Hey guys, today I have the honor to sit with James Freeman from Blue Bottle Coffee. Welcome to the show, James.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for hosting us in the Blue Bottle headquarters. I thought it would be a good idea to start the beginning, back when, in your days when you were a clarinetist. I think a lot of people probably don't know that before starting Blue Bottle, you had a full career as a clarinetist.
I did.
I think you spent a decade as a clarinetist, right? You started at the age of 12 to play clarinet.
Yeah, it was really kind of professionally it was about a decade, but it was like basically the only thing I did or thought about for a good 22 years.
And at what point did you decide that that's what you want to do professionally?
Oh, when I was around 12.
When you were 12?
Yeah, 12, 13. Around there.
And why was that?
I don't know if it's not a practical, when you want a career in the arts, it's not a practical decision. It's more like a calling. So I felt like compelled to try to make these sounds, try to connect with these people like Mozart or Bach or Messiaen, later in my life, Messiaen.
Got it. And so then you went to UC Santa Cruz to study philosophy?
Yeah, my teacher, there's a well-known teacher in Carmel Valley called Rosario Mazzeo. He had played in the Boston Symphony from 1933 to 1966, and he was a well-known teacher. He was the chair of the New England Conservatory for many years. And he retired, but he kept teaching. He took a small amount of students, and he would audition every year, and I won the audition I was accepted by him for him to be my teacher. So I moved down to that region, and I knew I wanted to get a degree in something. I wasn't too compelled by music as an academic subject. So, but what the courses, when I was thumbing through the course catalog, the courses that had the most appeal to me all seemed to be in the philosophy department. So as I was my primary purpose of being in that area was to study with him and work on my playing, but as I was going to school, I was also in the philosophy department. That's what I got my degree.
What were your early years as a clarinetist like? What did a typical week look like?
You mean early professional, or when I was a student?
Professional, yeah. Once you graduated.
So I started finding jobs here and there, which was nice, and then I was able to pay my bills right out of graduate school. And there were auditions, there was always practicing, always practicing, always trying to get better, and then performances, rehearsals, auditions, more performances, more rehearsals, more auditions. Would win some auditions, would not win others.
And you said you went to graduate school for philosophy as well?
No, my teacher was on the faculty of San Francisco Conservatory, and I wanted to keep studying with Rosario, so and then I was also seeing a teacher in New York. His name was Cal Opperman, very different personality, but also very, a great pedagogue. Mm-hmm. But I ended up getting a scholarship to go to the conservatory, and it ended up being much cheaper to just get a master's degree than study with Rosario outside of school. So I thought, well, it's not going to kill me to get a master's degree. And, I got a scholarship, so I moved up here and got my master's in clarinet performance, and then continued to study with Rosario.
Interesting. So were you already getting some gigs?
Yeah. I was starting to work and do some teaching and stuff like that.
And so you're able to pay your bills throughout. But in your book, which we'll talk about it a little later, I'll let you kind of talk about what's in it. But in your book, you mentioned that you were good enough to get the gigs that you didn't want, but not good enough to get the gigs that you wanted, and you started repeating, kind of doing the same types of pieces over and over, and these pieces that you didn't like as much, right?
No, sometimes. I mean, I think in the book, I wrote it a long time ago, but I talk about this one piece by Gustav Holst called "The Planet." It's just like I never really liked it to begin with, and one year I had to play it 2 or 3 times. It's just like, bro, this is not working out. This is not making me happy or inspired.
But I mean, one of the things that I kind of wanted to try to figure out is why did you persist so long if you weren't getting where you wanted?
Well, I think a lot of people. I mean, what motivated me was the necessity of buying groceries and paying rent. It's because I had that. I liked saying that I was a musician. I think that was part of it. But there's people that I used to play with, that are still playing in regional orchestras and teaching, adjunct faculty at various places, and seem quite happy, quite satisfied with that life that they've carved out, because it was quite difficult. So it wasn't a question so much of achievements, but it was a question of satisfaction.
Got it. And when you decided to quit, what was your plan? Did you have a plan at all, or were you...
I had a little escape. At the time, this was .com 1.0, and a bunch of my friends were getting hired up by this music startup called MongoMusic, and there was one person for every genre. It was a little bit Pandora-like, Spotify-like. Okay. Maybe ahead of its time. And they needed a classical person, and the pay was like a lot more than I was getting. So I thought, well, I'll drive down there, and I could still keep some of my gigs, and I'll drive down there and try that. And then Microsoft bought MongoMusic, and they moved us all up to Seattle. I lived in Seattle, worked in Redmond, and then they figured out how to automate what we did, and then fired us. That was right after 9/11. I mean, it was December of 2001.
So at Mongo, right?
Yeah.
At Mongo, you were listening to music and kind of creating playlists, or maybe
creating some playlists, some recommendations, but there's also a theoretical framework. They originally tried to do that with smart non-musician, like shiny new Stanford graduates, but eventually realized that even Stanford graduates who aren't trained in music can't analyze music. So, which I think was a hard place for them to get to. But so we were like little squirrels in the cage, and they would pipe in songs, and we would have 30 or 40 seconds to do this cursory analysis, so that and then that populated this great large database. So if you like this song, then presumably you might like these other songs that had similar properties in some way.
So when you were at MongoMusic, you slowly were tuning down the gigs.
Yeah, it happened very fast. Like I started to work in September, October, and then like the guys with the khaki pants started coming around, and then it was announced in the sort of around the turn of the century, the purchase, and then they moved us all up, and the whole thing lasted only about 12 or 14 months.
Okay, and what was your state of mind when you got fired then, or
Yeah,
I mean, downgraded? What was your frame of mind, and when did the idea for Blue Bottle come?
I was getting more and more interested in coffee. I'd been roasting coffee on a perforated baking sheet. I'd always been interested in food. I was a farmer's market shopper. So those things had launched. And then seeing the coffee culture in Seattle, which was still an espresso-based culture, but it was quite a bit ahead of the coffee culture at that time in San Francisco. So that got me thinking about what I wanted to do next. And so, when I got fired, they gave me some I'm sorry money, not a whole lot, but I had luckily bought a flat in Oakland, my wife at the time and I, so we had a place to go, so we moved back, lived in Oakland. That's when I started the bottle.
I mean, one of the things that's really inspiring about your story is that you didn't really have a business background at all, right?
No.
You had most of your career. Yeah, and you still today, you kind of, I don't want to say anti-business, but you're kind of proud of that more creative side, right? What's your vision of, how do you see business? And like, how did you see building a business in those early days when you didn't really have any idea how to do it, but you did it, right? What was your philosophy of business?
It's a lot to make stuff and sell stuff, right? Like, how hard can it be? When I opened Farmer's Market, I priced everything 25 cents more than what pizza was charging.
Okay.
And so it's like, at the end of the month, I always had money left over.
Yeah.
Right? How hard could it be?
Keep it simple.
Yeah. Art is about constraints. I had a very small, when I got my espresso cart, I didn't have very much room on the cart. So no sizes, no small, medium, large. I kind of hated that anyway. So that idea of like very simple, very minimal, this essentialist notion of what I should serve has always been part of how I like to keep things, but it served me very well in contexts like that, especially starting.
Did you get that idea of kind of minimalism, essentialism from any philosopher in particular, or was that just something that?
No, well, I mean, if you look into like, well, what do things mean? I guess the philosophy, when you study philosophy, that is a question that comes up quite often. What does this mean? And if you look, say, for example, what does a large cappuccino mean? Or what does it mean to have sizes? And it means like something's probably going to be too small and something's probably going to be too big, right? So the notion of sizes, if you're calling into question things as a matter of habit, then you realize that there's too much around all the time, and what people are craving, what I was craving, and what I think a lot of people are craving, is for somebody else to do the work, to somebody else to give you the best possible version of a product, rather than this mishmash of various flawed iterations from which to choose to make you feel like you're some sort of individual, even though what you're really craving is something that's delicious.
Yeah, and you say you mention a lot that if you had done all that market research, if you had kind of took a more analytical like business approach, that Blue Bottle would probably not be today, right?
Oh yeah, or it'd be just much stupider.
Yeah. So in the early days at the farmers market, how long was that period between you selling your beans at the farmers market and then opening your first shop?
Well, first farmers market, and that was beans only, was August of 2002, and then we opened the kiosk, which was our first 7-day-a-week location that didn't have to be like pulled back to the roastery. That was January of 2005.
Oh, wow,
So
okay.
2.5 years, I guess.
Yeah. And so those 2.5 first years, were there any struggles? Was it?
Were there days that weren't a struggle? I mean, it was all a struggle.
Okay.
You know, it was all force of will and you know, incredible feats of labor day after day, just like figuring it out, pounding it out, you know, being able to work as hard as possible for as long as possible. I remember early on, maybe it was Thanksgiving of 2004. It must have been Thanksgiving of 2004. My wife Caitlin, I was dating her at that time, and we kind of realized that we had Thanksgiving off, and we made this tiny little Thanksgiving in my ratty little Oakland apartment. And we realized that was the first day off we had that year. So the ability to work was, but that's what musicians do, you know, that you practice every day. It's not like, oh, it's the weekend, I'm not going to practice.
And at any point, did you ever consider quitting in those early days?
No, quit or do what? You know, there was no backup plan. It's like, could I go get a job at Pandora? Probably not. You know, I didn't have very many. I didn't want to go back to playing. So I didn't have very good options.
That was kind of the bridges were burnt, the boats were burnt, and this was like, make this happen, or
And it was exhausting, but I loved it, and it was exciting because there was a real momentum that was building. I believed in what I did. I thought that I was making very delicious products, and other people were excited about them too. So it was very exciting. It was exhausting, but it was very, very exciting. I was roasting in this little shed, and there was a bird bath right outside, and it would open the door, and it was very beautiful to get there early in the morning and do that.
when I mentioned to some friends yesterday that I was interviewing you, they were curious about how long Blue Bottle had been in business, and in their minds, it had been in business for about like 5 to 6 years, just from when they probably came in contact with us.
Went to school and moved to San Francisco.
They've actually been here for like a decade or more. But I thought that was interesting because that's around the same time that you got your first round of financing, right? So I'm curious what those, like, from the time you got your first kiosk, right?
That's 2005, right?
Up to 2012, right? What was those years like? What were the kind of the milestones of that period?
Right. That period. Well, it's not quite right. I got a minority investor in 2008.
Okay.
That was very helpful. He was a very interesting and helpful person. His name was John Eastburn. He worked with a company called Goldberg Ventures.
Okay.
And I learned a lot about business from him, just like not the flashy business, but just like this is what a P&L looks like, and just sort of being prudent and not spending what you don't have, and being methodical, being clever with money, and treating it like it was a precious resource. Sometimes doesn't happen.
Yeah.
I learned very good lessons from him about that, and also it was a minority investment, so I had kind of complete control still, but there's been a few people over the years that I think I've learned quite a bit about, or quite a bit from. So I had that experience, and then going into 2012, we had opened in New York in 2010, and we had opened the Ferry Building in 2009, and that was really busy. And being in New York, I liked New York. I thought there were a lot of opportunities in New York, and we opened kind of in a clever way and kind of made a big splash with the money we spent, and things were getting quite busy, and so around we'd kind of proven that it wasn't just a San Francisco thing, even as long ago as 2010. And oh, go ahead.
Is that when you realized that Blue Bottle was going to be big, or at what point did you realize that?
I don't know, like, what does big mean? I knew there was a lot of demand. For many, many years, it was just like trying to keep up with demand. And so I had a feeling that we could do well in a number of places. And there's like between 2010 and 12, a ton of press, a lot of, maybe 2008 and 12. That was when I stopped like roasting all the coffee or serving coffee. That was the time when I started to think about like more about cafe design and what should cafes be and how do we make them in a certain way, and how do I get people on my the colleagues that I was working with, how do we align ourselves towards certain goals. And I've learned a lot. It's kind of a rough way to figure things out sometimes, is by doing them. But I learned a lot just by doing them, trying different things. And 2012, I thought, well, this is an interesting time. There's a lot of potential. So then I got this email from Brian, our current CEO. The code word was "help you grow." That's when people wanted to talk about being investors, and I would get a lot. His was kind of nice and charming, so I thought it's not going to kill me to have a coffee with him. And then that's when that happened, and he brought this roster of internet celebrities on board, and they helped spread the word more. So, ...
In this last part of the interview, I want to dive a little into kind of your philosophies about work and just life in general. And you often talk about these Japanese coffee houses, Kisaten, right? Am I pronouncing it right? Yeah. And you mentioned in a previous interview that the Kisaten have showed you how, like, one example of how to live life. Can you just, for those that don't know Kisaten, give a brief overview of what it is, and what did you mean by that?
Sure. It's Kisaten is an old-fashioned Japanese coffee house. So there's no espresso machines. Everything's, or almost always, it's pour over coffee done to order. No coffee machines. Very low tech, lo-fi. Usually classical music on the stereo. And the few that I've been so inspired by over the years are these peaks. There's Kisatens where everything isn't as perfect as I'd like it to be, but the others can be just extraordinary in their mastery over simple things like pouring water and making these certain tastes, hospitality. Well, I guess to backtrack, there's a phrase, Japanese phrase I came across a few months ago called it's Ichigo Ichie. And what that means is one time, one person. And what that means is, when you walk in to get a coffee or cocktail or pizza, whatever it is, the person making that experience for you, making the coffee or cocktail or pizza, that's like that moment that you have together. That's your one opportunity to have that moment, and so it's important. It's never going to happen again. And so what do you do to enrich that moment, to make it as special and as consequential as possible? And that moment requires your full attention, and it requires your dedication. It requires that you got enough sleep last night, and that you woke up ready to work, and that you're ready to give everything, give your all to that moment. And it's easier to get those types of experiences in Japan in the past that I've had, where people are really dedicated to these simple things and to sharing that moment that they'll never have again. So that's why I like the Kisatan. I like what it means, but it's mostly what's behind it is that phrase and that dedication to service.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Do you think that principle applies to any line of work? Can anyone apply it in their career?
Yeah.
That your work actually matters. Actually, if you
Right. Yeah. I mean, how many times have you been in a meeting and it's like, somebody's talking to you and you're looking, it's like, is that Facebook? It's like, what's more important? Yeah.
An interesting thing in Japan as well is that they tend to have these lifelong careers, right? Where it's
I think that's changing, but that's very much been part of the past. Yeah.
looking at your career again, it's like you've done two things in about 40 years, a little under 40 years.
Go on.
Do you think that, because in our day and age, I feel like young people, and I'm counting myself in that, there's so many options that one, it's hard to choose something because there's too many options, and two, once we pick something, it's kind of like the paradox of choice. Like once we pick something, like since there's so many options, we tend to regret that choice, and a lot of people tend to job switch. Every other year, switch positions or even switch line of work. Do you think that model of kind of dedication to one craft, do you think that's a good model that people?
It's worked to me. I think where you might be misapprehending that is it dedication to a company or dedication to a discipline? For me, I've always worked for myself, and so there have been these two things that I've been interested in. Pretty much only two things. But if it's a company, companies have strengths and weaknesses, and it's weird to sort of pour your, to be dedicated to a company is a different type of feeling and activity than to be dedicated to an art or a product. Yeah. And so perhaps what you're talking about is the breakdown of this social contract that has been in Japan for many years and the United States for less, about a company taking care of its employees in a certain way, and those employees reciprocating with respect and reverence and time towards the company. There's not, like with the decline of unionization in the United States, and you see it, there's that sort of mutual respect and reverence for a company and its workers, I think, is getting frayed, and I think you see that reflected in how people tend to work.
So it's more about mastery of a craft, right?
Yeah. That's always been what I've been interested in. Yeah. And the business stuff, it's nice. It's like it's nice that it's done so well. It was unexpected, but what I've always been interested in is this idea of making things, making coffee, making a space for serving coffee. Okay.
Before I ask my last question, I wanted to talk about your book quickly because it really, it changed how I approach coffee.
Oh, that's nice.
And it really goes in depth about kind of how you guys source, not just you, but just like how good coffee is sourced and processed. And did you want to add anything to that? Why should people, or why would people be interested in reading this?
I wrote it a long time ago. It came out in October of 2012, and so I was working on it in 2011, maybe even the end of 2010. So that's a long time ago in coffee years. But who I wrote it for was not the coffee expert. I was still pretty close to my experiences making coffee at the farmers market. So that my ideal audience for that book were the people waiting in line at the farmers market cart, who liked food, who loved food, traveled a bit, who loved good coffee, but wanted to learn a little bit more about it. Mm-hmm. And then, they were interested in cooking, so there's a section of recipes at the end. So that, it's a very generalist book. It's not an expert's book. It's not a barista's handbook.
Okay.
And I wanted to kind of demystify certain things. I think I said, like, when you're shopping for an espresso machine, you should have to think about how heavy they are.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to demystify a certain thing, a few things. And, as people are still buying it, it's still helpful. So that makes me happy.
Yeah, for me it was when I started getting into espresso drinks. That's what it was really helpful for, because you have some cool tips.
Oh yeah, just about practicing.
Yeah.
People think if they make 3 or 4 drinks, they can't figure it out.
Yeah.
And it's like saying, I bought my Steinway 2 weeks ago and I still can't play Bach.
So my last question is, what impact do you want to have with Blue Bottle?
Now that we're at 60 stores, that's I guess a reasonable question to ask. I never spent much time thinking about it, because I was always focused on these micro details and the countertop surface and cupping for coffees. And I wasn't thinking of an impact farther than what past me or our staff or our shops. But in terms of impact, there's 3 words we think about: deliciousness, hospitality, and sustainability. And those are very important things to me and to us at Blue Bottle. And so if we've been able to kind of further those things in the coffee industry, then that would make me happy. Just getting better and better at that, and encouraging people to think about those 3 words.
Yeah.
That's what I'd like.
Yeah, well, I can definitely speak for myself, but you've definitely impacted my life by you introduced me to what good coffee is.
It's really nice, isn't it?
It's wonderful. If you ask all my friends, they'll tell you I'm obsessed. But
Good. Mine will too.
what you've done is introduce a small moment in the morning that every day you really look forward to, and this little moment of happiness that you have every day. So thanks for that.
Cool. Thanks.
And thanks for hosting us. Yeah. All right. That's it, guys.
All right.
Thank you.